Assalamu alaikum everyone. I welcome our esteemed panelists to the final session of the 6th YGA Legal Conference 2021. This session is being curated in coordination with the Women in Law Initiative. We are very grateful to Ms. Nida Usman, founder of Women in Law, for her unflinching support to Youth General Assembly. I would formally begin by introducing the Youth General Assembly. The Youth General Assembly is an autonomous assembly that has been formed in order to provide a credible platform that instigates the true sense of policy and strategy making, equitable administration, and non-customary legislative public speaking on social issues by empowering enthusiasm in youth for being the future ambassadors and democrats. The aim is to inculcate the convening and confronting qualities amongst the youth to expand their perspective and knowledge regarding true democracy and parliamentary politics. The aim of the conference is to ensure the role of youth as a driving force behind justice and extend its role in creating a bridge between textual knowledge and practical application to empower the youth of today. Joining us today is a dynamic panel of 4 highly accomplished lawyers: Barrister Aisha Iqbal, who is the founder of Alif Se Insaniyat; Ms. Khatija Ali, a leading advocate of the High Court and an international development consultant; Ms. Aruba Sattar, who is the founder of Feminist Judgments Project; and Ms. Mavra Ghaznavi, who is the founder of Shumar Project. I believe that our audience would surely like to hear more about these amazing projects, so I would request all panelists to introduce their projects to our audience. We would start with Barrister Aisha Iqbal.
Hello and assalamu alaikum to all the viewers. Thank you so much, Hania, for the introduction. As Hania mentioned, I'm the founder of Alif Se Insaniyat. It is a social welfare organization that is headquartered in Karachi, Pakistan, but we're working not just in Karachi or even in Sindh, but we're trying and focusing on working across Pakistan and in different parts of the world. For example, Canada, Malaysia, United Kingdom, and USA, where we have different individuals looking at different projects currently. Now, Alif Se Insaniyat is an organization with quite different objectives, but the one that we're working on right now in terms of Pakistan is access to justice. Given the current climate, the fact that access to justice is becoming more and more difficult, not just for people of Pakistan in terms of men, but women, minorities, individuals who would want to get their dispute resolved in court, but struggle due to various issues. For example, character assassination, lack of affordability of lawyers, the difficult and inaccessible court structures, methods, procedures, etc. So that's Alif Se Insaniyat for you.
Thank you, Miss. It was a great initiative. Now we move to Miss Khatija, so if you could introduce yourself. Miss, I'm afraid we can't hear you. There seems to be some distortion. So, Miss, your voice is breaking. So, it's very unfortunate that we can't hear you. Maybe you could reconnect. So we'll move to Ms. Aruba. So Ms. Aruba, you're the founder of the Feminist Judgments Project. And what is the aim behind it? What is the role? And how successful has it been?
Right. So the Feminist Judgments Project is essentially premised on the idea that the interpretation of law is never truly objective, that there are always biases involved. And if those biases are involved, then why not have a feminist biases as well? To see that law kitna expand ho sakta hai, uske andar kya cheezein andar aa sakti hain. So our premise is that not just like criminal law and family law, but other aspects of law like tax law, environmental law, discrimination law, they could all benefit from a feminist reinterpretation. So we want to take theory and then show it into practice by actually rewriting judgments of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. So interestingly enough, Mavra is like one of the people who's rewriting a judgment, Rais Khan, which is like काफी पुरानी judgment है. So she's also going to be examining कि उस वक्त अगर judges एक feminist perspective से interpret करते तो law कितना ज़्यादा change हो जाता. So the entire idea then being कि even right now the way that the law is being interpreted, it can like open up a bit more. So while it's not like an activist project, it is more of an academic project, but I do think it's a sort of academic activism in which we are in which we're working, by showing the judges, okay, this is also an alternative way of how to do it. And I also just want to clarify, this is not unique to Pakistan. And this project has been undertaken in multiple countries and has shown like really good results and also reopened cases in some instances.
But surely it's a trailblazer in Pakistan. So now we'll move to Ms. Mavra. Ms. Mavra, your introduction for our audience, because you're also the founder of the Shamar project and you have so many credentials to your name. So if you could please introduce yourself. Is it just my internet or can we not hear Ms. Mavra?
We can't hear her. Maybe she should reconnect us.
Okay, Ms. Mavra, there is some issue with the internet at your end. So if you could reconnect, I'm really sorry. Now we'll move to Ms. Khatija. Ms. Khatija, if your internet is stable, would you mind introducing yourself? Ms. Khatija, we unfortunately can't hear you again. So we'll wait for you to connect, maybe. But unfortunately, Ms. Khatija, we can't hear you. So we'll begin with the first question for our webinar for Ms. Aisha, and then we'll have Ms. Aruba's response on it. And till then, our remaining panelists will also rejoin. Okay, so Ms. Mavra, hi. Can you hear us now?
Hi, yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Thanks, Hania, and thanks, Aruba, for introducing what I do a little bit. I'm really looking forward to the publication, inshallah, sometime in the next, 6 months, I hope. And project finance, specifically in the energy sector. After that, I moved to a rule of law project that looked at reforming criminal justice systems in Punjab. And I worked closely with the police specifically. And most recently, I established the Shamar project, which is an open data initiative that looks at making data accessible and open and available in Urdu, English, available online, and
Ms. Mavra, there is some distortion in your voice again. I think it's just because of the internet. Okay, so it's very unfortunate that we couldn't properly hear Ms. Mavra, although she has been doing some great work. And we would really want to hear more from her. So Ms. Khatija, you're back just now?
I'm going to give this a last try. Can you hear me?
Yes, Miss, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, my name is Khadija Ali. I'm an advocate High Court. I basically have my own practice based in Islamabad, and a lot of the work that I do is based on my
Miss, I lost you. Um, uh, I guess you can reconnect again with your data if that maybe helps. So with that, we'll move towards the first question. We'll begin with Barrister Aisha's response on this. So, Miss, there are two parallel situations, two parallel narratives, and I've put them across. You can tell which one do you agree with more. So the first one is that we are an over-regulated society in which there is legislative protection available to women, but the problem comes with implementation and awareness. And the other parallel statement or scenario is that our laws are not pro-women, and there are issues with the laws, and that's partly the reason why women are not in a very good condition in our country. Which one would you agree with more?
Right. Hania, before I begin, I'd just like to quickly applaud the efforts that YGA is doing towards creating effective dialogue and discourse and using its platform not just to empower the youth, but to actually come across and have discussions that hopefully will have lasting impact. Secondly, I'm very honored to be sharing the platform with individuals such as Ms. Aruba, Khatija, Mavra, and I look really forward to seeing the kind of work that they're doing and looking at the law from the feminist point of view, because I feel like that is very, very important and very much needed in a society like ours. Okay, moving on to answer your question. I feel like in my expertise and limited experience with litigation, because I have to kind of give a disclaimer there, I feel like I would agree with the first narrative that you shared, that there are laws in Pakistan, there are legislations, we do have a plethora of case law that do support women. I mean, if, for example, we look at the Domestic Violence Bill 2013 that was passed in Sindh, we look at the Child Marriages Act, we have protection of for women against harassment act in workplace. So if I'm to say that there are no legislations at all that protect women in Pakistan, and all legislations have been created for protection of men or pro-men, then that, in my view, that is an incorrect statement. However, having said that, yes, we could improve our legislations, we could bring clarity in our legislations, we could, in various circumstances, maybe not refer our legislations to different councils. I'm sure you know what I'm referring to, as currently we have certain problems in that area. But to say again that there are no legislations would be incorrect. However, implementation is where we lack significantly as a nation. I mean, the fact that I'm sitting here and talking and will be talking about domestic violence and gender-based violence, I mean, we can talk about it all day long, but the fact that we have to do it, there's still a need in 21st century to talk about this is very heartbreaking. It's very heart-wrenching that we still have to tell people, we still have to talk sense into individuals, into companies, into the judiciary, the police, that gender-based violence and domestic violence is a crime. There is still an understanding, a false narrative going on that it is a private matter. So I'll come on to that later, but yes, it is the implementation that we lack severely. And along with implementation, I feel like the institutions of the state, the different facets of the criminal justice system, particularly the police, this is, I think, it opens up so many different problems for a nation like ours, that at the first stage where in foreign nations, women would consider going to the police as their first resort because they trust the police, because they feel this is where they may be able to get protection. It is the absolutely last resort taken by women in Pakistan. And that is due to various reasons. If you want, I can go into them right now. I'm not sure if that is something you want me to cover at this stage. So if you could just give me some clarity, I'd be.
Yes, Ms. We'll move towards this very important aspect that you've indicated in the very next question. But right now, I would like to take Ms. Aruba's response on the first statement, the first question. So, Ms. Aruba, can you hear us?
Yeah. Okay, so first off, like agar mera internet beech mein, disconnect karta or something, just let me know. Or if you can't hear me. So that's an interesting question, right? I feel like it's a mixture of both, right? So it's interpretation to a certain degree, and there's legislation as well. So I'm going to go through like a couple of examples to illustrate how both of them work at the same time. अगर हम legislation की बात करते हैं, तो पहली बात तो ये कि जब मर्दों के साथ जिनसे हरासा होता है, या like whenever they are raped, so it wasn't classified as rape in the law, right? It was called as sodomy. And there's so many case law which distinguishes कि अगर एक बहन और भाई दोनों के साथ rape हुआ है, तो जो औरत के साथ हुआ है वो rape और जो मर्द के साथ है वो sodomy है. The problem was definitely in the legislation over there, right? Which has obviously changed now that the law has changed. But the way that we verbalize a certain like criminal act really does pose a huge problem, and that's the essential difference which the legislation can make. QSO, 151.4, I think, if I'm not wrong, that allowed people to question the character of a woman if she came forward with a rape allegation, that too has been done away with. And you see that अब courts भी थोड़ा मुख्तलिफ side पे आ गए, because as a result of that, MFLO 1961 made huge changes for women, जिसके बाद later on the judiciary then encapsulated on them a bit more. So it is a mixture of both. Currently though, I would agree with Aisha के बात legislation की शायद इतनी नहीं है जितनी interpretation की है. And the reason why I say that is twofold. First off, agar aap history dekhein, पिछले 40 साल का trend dekhein, there's like this very good paper which has been co-written by Sara Malkani, I think Zonia Yusuf and Aisha Khan, जो कि 2019 के अंदर publish हुआ है, where they look at कि पिछले 40 साल के अंदर कितनी ज़्यादा strategic litigation की है ख़वातीन activists ने, and how they've changed the public interest litigation, environmental law, and काफ़ी ज़्यादा और areas of law as a result of constantly bringing cases up to the court. So that definitely has an impact. लेकिन ये जो impact भी है, ये थोड़ा सा superficial सा है, right? Because it can only be clearly seen in areas such as criminal law, या फिर inheritance law perhaps, and then family law. And वहाँ पे भी like you can see कि किस तरह law change हुआ है. Family law के अंदर for instance पहले औरतों को consent के बगैर खुला नहीं मिल सकता था, right? Pre-partition. But then that changed as a result of Bilqis, Fatma, and then Khurshid Jan, then encapsulated on that even a bit more. And now you don't need the permission. You don't need the consent of your husband. You don't even have to prove your husband has done anything wrong in order to get khula. So you can see with gender obsolete practices, interpretation ke through change hui hai. So the legislation in itself also changed, but interpretation gravely matters. Sorry about that. मसला सिर्फ ये है कि legislation अगर आप कर भी लो ना दूसरे areas of law के अंदर, which brings me to my second point, it would still be dependent on the interpretation of the judges. So for instance, if you take a look at this new case, Atif Zarif versus the state, Mansoor Ali Shah ki judgment hai, जिसके he talks about the two finger rape test that should be outdated and it's like against the dignity of women and वो सारा कुछ. Legislation सब कुछ इसको निकाल दिया हम लोगों ने, but still in paragraph 4, you know, Justice Mansoor says कि जो complainant है वो एक educated lady है और वो उन्होंने अपना एक degree लिया, अभी वो एक और degree भी ले रही हैं, and therefore she does not have any reason to falsely implicate anyone because उससे उनकी खुद dignity tarnish होगी, right? So एक इस तरह का sentence is still there. So you can have the legislation, but ultimately the interpretation can make like a huge difference in how far we come in terms of gender equitable practices and narrative in itself. Tax law, corporate law, environmental law, discrimination law, uske andar jo legislation hai, it never, I don't think I've seen a lot of legislation which takes into account कि gender differences क्या हैं और किस तरह कुछ चीज़ें जो है वो औरतों को ज़्यादा मुतासर करती हैं. लेकिन उसके अंदर कोर्ट्स का काम हो सकता है. Interpretation can make a huge change. Even within tax cases, I would argue that if courts start looking at the disparate impact that taxation, for instance, on cellular phones can make in the community, poor community को ज़्यादा impact करता है अगर ज़्यादा taxation वहाँ पर हो. And औरतें जो हैं वो especially mobile phones को इस्तेमाल करती हैं in order to report domestic violence, in order to mobilize, in order to like have safe spaces, because उनकी बाहर you know, like community के साथ इतना ज़्यादा interaction नहीं होता, like तो mobility भी थोड़ी सी limited होती है. So if you look at it from that perspective, then interpretation of the law can have very wide-reaching effects, not just in traditionally stereotypical female-dominated areas like criminal law and family law, or inheritance law, जहाँ पर औरतों की inheritance नहीं मिलती, but other areas of law as well. And जहाँ पर legislation is lacking, the judges surely can do something more. So I guess, I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, that has been a very... Miss Khatija, if you can hear us. Okay, that's very unfortunate that we cannot hear you. Miss Mavra, can you hear us? So it seems that we can't hear Miss Khatija and Mavra. Khatija dropped in a comment that she has some issues with StreamYard. Miss Mavra, can you hear us? Okay, so that's very unfortunate that I wasn't able to either Miss Khadija or Miss Mavra. So um, we'll have to very unfortunately move towards the second question for Miss Aisha. Miss Mavra, are you saying something?
Hania, maybe you could recommend them to reconnect one more time and see if it works.
Yeah, we've had this in the past also. One of our panelists, they never seem to connect properly. So, Miss Khatija and Miss Mavra, if you could reconnect. And okay, so I think they can't hear us. Okay, perfect. So we'll move towards the second question since Barrister Aisha and Ms. Aruba seem to hear us. How do you assess the gender sensitivity in the judicial system, Ms. Aisha? So you can talk about the police, prosecution, and then the judicial and attitude towards female litigants as well. So what would be your analysis on this?
Right. In terms of how sensitive the judiciary, the criminal justice system, or even the justice system is to gender in Pakistan is a Pandora's box. I mean, it's such a wide question because it covers so many different levels within the criminal justice system, starting from if I talk about the criminal justice system, the first point of contact that the complainant has with the police all the way up to the judiciary, perhaps even the Supreme Court, if he or she is successful in filing an appeal and getting that appeal heard in the apex court of the country. Now, as someone who has been working on not just the impact of COVID-19 on the criminal justice system, but also how the police departments have been responding to complainants, not just women complainants, but also male complainants who've had different criminal activities, such as robbery, burglary, XYZ done to them. I feel like this is one of the biggest problems that we as a country is facing at the moment. The police department, provincial level, federal level, has a certain reputation in our country. And it is very sad to admit to the sad reality that unfortunately it is true. There are a lot of different challenges that male or female complainants face when they go to the police and to file the FIR, the first information report. Now, if I'm talking strictly from the point of view of women who go ahead and want to report either domestic violence ka case or gender-based violence agar unke saath hota hai, either of a sexual nature or a physical abuse, whatever kind of violence it is, the challenges that they face are significant. There was a study done, I think, a couple of years ago by Aurat Foundation, if I'm not wrong, where I think about 43 females of a certain under the age of 30 were sent to different police stations across the country. I think about 20 police stations with the same crime. And all of them had the same response when they reported their findings back. The attitude of the police officers did not allow them to even go ahead and give out their story in entirety. The dissuading attitude of the police officers when they went ahead and complained of either it was a gender-based violence crime that they were trying to complain to the police about and get an FIR registered, first of all, the approach of the police was that, ye ghar ka mamla hai. This has nothing to do with us. Ye aap jaake ghar pe resolve kare. And when they and it doesn't matter what province they were in, because this was a study done across different provinces, and we all know that हमारे पास वैसे भी domestic violence की legislation सिंध में है, बलूचिस्तान में है, इस्लामाबाद का भी dispute चल रहा है. KPK also managed to pass the legislation, I think after a lot of hurdles, if I'm not wrong, a couple of years ago. तो legislation आपकी मौजूद है, लेकिन उसकी implementation absolutely zero है. जब आप police थाने में जाते हैं and they went and they filed, चाह रहे थे कि इनकी FIR कट जाए, पुलिस का attitude completely uncooperative था. Like I said, पहला issue ये था. दूसरा issue, when somebody as a woman is going and filing and telling them that she has been sexually abused, the attitude of the police officers changed in terms of they started looking at the victim as a suspect, which is interesting because she's there to report the fact that she or her body has been violated by an individual, and the attitude of the police officer is that, oh, you may be complicit in the act. Again, discouraging people to come forward. The third issue that that was seen not just in the report but across the board, when we speak to complainants, when we ask them how or what their experience has been like at a police station, the response is that in certain cases, those women don't even feel safe inside the police station. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the recent video circulating of what a policeman, in a sexual context, did to a woman who had been arrested and was being transported. That in itself is video evidence of how the police officers train women, treat women who have been either who are inmates or who are coming to report a crime or are just coming there as a witness. Other than that, I just feel that if these are just a few examples, I mean, there's so much more: the illiteracy, the lack of qualifications, the corruption, the bribery that these women face at the reporting level, that of course the other women are discouraged from even coming forward with their case. Uske alawa jo aapka kuch police officers ki ek approach hoti hai, they feel that I mean, I'm hoping they're coming from a right place, but उनकी बड़ी mediator type approach होती है कि अगर कोई आया है मसला लेके कि मेरे husband ने या मेरे father ने या मेरे भाई ने मुझे मारा है या मुझे पीटा है, तो लाइक अच्छा भाई को बुलाओ, हम आपस में मसला सॉल्व कर देते, लेकिन मैं FIR नहीं काटूंगा. Again, these are the words of an actual complainant who was describing her experience to us. And she's like, nahi, it is my family matter, I want to report. And they're like, nahi ji, wo hum nahi karenge. So again, यहीं पर ही आपके ग्रास रूट लेवल पर ही अगर हम प्रॉब्लम को, if we try to get a hold of it, we try to resolve it, then perhaps we could encourage a lot of other women to come forward. There's this narrative that keeps going around in Pakistan कि जी ये मसले तो हर जगह होते हैं, आप क्या कहते हैं, न्यूज़पेपर खोलें या आप रिपोर्ट्स पढ़ें तो हर मुल्क में ये मसला हो रहा है. पाकिस्तान, this is not only because we have desi individuals or desi culture of Pakistan. The fact that in other countries this is happening is because the police actually believe the women and the cases actually get reported. That is why the number of cases that we hear of this woman was sexually assaulted and the matter went to court is high, because the judicial system, the police, the magistrate, the court clerk, they're trained to believe a woman who's coming forward to tell her story. I mean, don't even get me started on the stigmas attached to even going to a police station. This one police officer had said to one of the female complainants, जी आपको पता नहीं है थाने में reputable औरतें नहीं आती. Again, you just listen to these stories and you think, did this actually happen? Because coming from backgrounds where we've never had to experience this, it becomes, an eye-opener. I mean, when I wanted to, because I also am an associate professor at University of London providers, and I teach A-level law, there were different occasions when I wanted to take my A-level students to a thana, and I wanted them to see how an FIR is lodged and how investigation is done. And believe me, 98% of the female students, because I have a big ratio of female students in class, their parents refused. They were willing to send their children, their teenage children, to visit the central jail for women and juvenile, of course, but not to a police station. Again, telling you that perhaps this narrative is real in the society. कि थाने में जाना एक respectable औरत का काम ही नहीं है. So yeah, that's on the police level. Of course, there are other issues when the matter goes up to the court. Yeah.
Take that forward from there. Of course, you very rightly pointed out that the quintessential Thana culture is the biggest impediment at the grassroots level, and cases are either not reported or they're not properly prosecuted at that level. Miss Mavra or Miss Khatija, can you hear us now? Miss Khatija, I could hear that you said yes, but that was distorted. So I would try to take your stance on this as well. Miss Khadija, there's no voice from your end. Maybe you could connect from your mobile phone. So there might be some issues with your device connecting to StreamYard. So that's one issue that may have propped up. So you can maybe reconnect from another device. I hope that works. Ms. Mavra, are you there? Yeah, Ms. Mavra, I would really like to know your stance on this as well. Your voice still seems to be inaudible at our end. I don't know what the issue is with the internet connection or there's something with StreamYard. So we'll move to Ms. Aruba. Ms. Aruba, what would be your stance? Ms. Aisha covered the police attitude in quite detail. So what about the next step when they're brought to court after all the hurdles and hindrances? If something eventually lands in court and there's a female who's either accused or who's basically the victim, how's the judicial treatment? We've heard that there's a lot of hostility there as well.
Right. So it really depends on the cases, right? So, and the stereotypes which are present like at every single level. I think in order to understand that though, we need to understand that the problem isn't just with the legal system in itself. The problem is a societal problem which like then levels up and goes into like each particular institution jahan par you try to go for recourse. So you can see the same kind of stereotypes defining the lives of women in educational institutions, in courts, obviously, in hospitals, in any kind of profession that they enter. And then obviously they seep into the legal system and the judiciary as well. So I think you shouldn't try to divorce the problem that courts specifically face or the problems that women face in courts from the rest of the society, because they're very pertinent in informing like judges kya soch rahe hain, because they're part of that society, right? And हम चाहे जो मर्जी सोचते हैं, like judges are human beings at the end of the day, and they do have their biases which seep into their entire way in which they approach stuff. So definitely, like in family cases, for instance, a lot of the times, well, the idea कि बार-बार तारीख लगती है, आपको बार-बार वापस आना पड़ता है, बार-बार सुलह के बारे में कहा जाता है, I've seen in my experience like judges being like कि अच्छा सुलह कर लें, ये कर लें, वो कर लें, despite the fact that there's like a huge evidence of domestic violence also happening. The woman is very clearly like does not want to stay with her husband. This basically happens mostly at the lower courts. I don't know what it is, but apparently like the Supreme Court precedents are not really cited in lower courts. And somehow there's like this huge disjuncture between, okay, Supreme Court ne kya rule kiya, and then the lower court's not following that. So wo sare sexual stereotypes wahan par bhi aa jate hain. Huge pressure to compromise on cases and stuff like that. And then litigants ke liye especially, the normal problems which all litigants face, such as trial delays, the unsafe attitude that they feel, is magnified for women, just like every other problem is magnified for women and minorities. I would like to say that it's not just an entirely gender-based issue either, because you have to understand that gender needs to be looked at from a perspective that there are multiple layers of discrimination happening. So a problem which a female Sunni litigant might face would be very different from a Hindu female litigant, because there's an added layer of religious discrimination. Sexuality, of course, like Pakistan, perhaps like nobody is very open about their sexuality, but that's like an added layer of discrimination that happens in terms of how you live your life, in terms of how like judges view you, all of that stuff. So therefore, your case in front of a judge, like the way that it's interpreted, while those specific kind of discrimination should be taken into account, they are not, because अगर कोई gender issue आता भी है courts के सामने, तो वो उसको सिर्फ gender से evaluate करते हैं, वो दूसरी layers of discrimination से नहीं करते. अगर एक हिंदू औरत आती है तो वो सिर्फ religious layer से करेंगे, वो उसका economic background और वो सारा कुछ देख के एक holistic perspective से वो नहीं देख सकते. Because हमारा ये भी एक idea होता है कि हम लोगों ने law को objectively sort of देखना है. And objective का मतलब necessarily ये है कि जो भी एक औरत की lived reality है, that doesn't come into play either. So definitely like a lot of those stereotypes coming in family and criminal cases especially, and then a complete negation of that in other kinds of cases. I hope that does answer your question a bit.
Yes, Ms. Aruba, it's a very extensive account. I recently came across this article, and basically the story of an 8-year-old child who had accused the father of rape, and then when the matter was in court and the father was sentenced and he was proven guilty, throughout the court proceeding, the child and the child's mother were continuously character assassinated. So an 8-year-old child was subjected to a lot of very rude comments, something that might just impact her whole life. So how do you view this situation, Ms. Aruba? Why is this culture? Because in this court culture, particularly, I'm indicating towards, because there is Justice Mansoor Ali Shah's judgment present in this, that the character of a woman or the character of the victim is not to be very instrumental or is not to be entertained in a court proceeding. So how do you view this situation? Why do we still have these instances?
Okay, so two reasons for that. Number one, if you take a look at lower court ki judgments and if you take a look at Supreme Court ke precedents, there's a huge disjuncture. Like, it seems like the Supreme Court ke jo naye precedents hote hain, I don't know if they're not reported or if they're not willfully being taken into arguments by the councils jo ke lower courts mein honge. Maybe like Aisha would have more knowledge about that, but there is like a huge disjuncture. Those practices, those cases just don't make their way into the trial courts. Whether that's malicious or not, done, with ignorance or with any malified intent, I don't know, but that's definitely the present reality over there. If you examine case law, the second problem is that humna as a society, we're very, very pro-violent society. Okay, and the way to sort of explain that is there's this report by the ILO as well, right, which talks about कि जो आपके shared beliefs होते हैं ना एक सब culture के अंदर, those kind of define कि आपकी limit क्या है, कि tolerable behavior क्या है, right? So आप समझते हैं कि आपके पास एक डब्बा है, there's a box of what can be defined as tolerable behavior. So if anybody kills somebody, capital punishment. So all the people who are pro-violence would fall into that box. And as a nation, we're always like talking about how capital punishment is the way to go. Then uske andar aur cheezein aa jati hain, like if a woman is walking outside at night without like a man protecting her, so that would also not be tolerable behavior. Hence, the idea of violence can be justified. The problem lies that Pakistan ka wo jo tolerable box hai na, that's becoming bigger and bigger. So like more things are falling into it. And uske andar jo hai, phir apparently like even a child's behavior, that can also fall into it. Just the idea that you are female, therefore a temptation, it just doesn't make any sense anymore. Like you can try to justify it. And I feel like even Western feminist theories, they don't really explain, and they can't really explain the reality of South Asian femicide, which is going on. Because the culture is completely different. Because हमारा जो tolerable limit है, वो मुख्तलिफ है. And because हमारा society के तौर पे, we have violence as a response to everything. So फिर जो भी चीज़ उस tolerable behavior के अंदर नहीं आती, तो we obviously like react with violence to it, including, and that can, I sort of explain the judge's behavior, because that judge is then also part of the society. So two level ke par cheezein aa rahi hain. Number one, precedents ka nahi pata, and number two, as a society, there's like this predilection towards violence, which causes these things and which causes people to even somehow justify or not listen to the testimony of a child, and because वो tolerable box के अंदर ये चीज़ नहीं आती कि एक बंदा भी अपनी बच्ची को rape कर सकता है, like biological father can also rape, because वो उस चीज़ के अंदर नहीं आती, therefore it's not understood easily. I hope that kind of statement helps.
And of course, the precedent either is not being willfully cited, or secondly, the societal impact and the societal tendencies are also creeping into the courtroom quite naturally. So Ms. Mavra or Ms. Khatija, if you could just say something so that we could actually hear you. Very unfortunate that neither Ms. Khatija nor Ms. Mavra are audible. So that's very, very unfortunate. We could hear from them. Miss, there's some vibration that does indicate that you're speaking, but we can't hear you. Okay. No, unfortunately, you and with a very, very heavy heart, I think I'll have to move ahead to the third question. So, because we do not have any male representation on this panel, so some people in the fraternity or even outside the fraternity who have a little know-how of the law, they tend to say that the law positively discriminates against women. So, and they cite the reference that, okay, the punishment is never going to be equal for the same crime. A man and a woman will not have the same punishment. Secondly, a woman cannot have a physical remand unless it's a murder case or another case. And thirdly, or any other serious case. Thirdly, whenever an accused woman will be brought to court, her hands will not be tied. Fourthly, decide that when it comes to family law matters and the custody of the child, it always goes to the woman, no matter what the issue is. So the law is positively discriminating. तो मतलब कानून में तो प्रॉब्लम है ही नहीं, जुडिशियल एटीट्यूड तो खवातीन के लिए ज़्यादा ही सॉफ्ट है. तो अगर आप लोग egalitarian perspective को if you're pushing that forward, तो फिर ये सारी चीज़ें they need to be done away with. So would you agree with this, Miss Aisha? कि अगर औरत को भी कोर्ट में ला रही हैं, so hands need to be tied, the punishment has to be same if we want equality?
Right, that's a very interesting question and probably something that I've not considered in detail previous to you putting forward the question. But yeah, it actually makes you think. I mean, but then again, I'm actually not very surprised at the arguments put forward by the male members of the legal fraternity, because anytime you talk about equality in front of a man, the first thing he or she he tends to ask is, oh, can I punch her? If that's what equality is at the end of the day. So I think just like building up on that, if that is what equality means to the male gender or the male fraternity, then that is very unfortunate, because, circling back to what Aruba was saying earlier, that the Western feminist theory is not a true representative of our culture. It's the same thing here again. I mean, the concept of equality or the concept of women rights, yes, we derive it from the Constitution, we derive it from the international conventions that we've signed, but our culture, our religious limitations, our cultural limitations are very, very different, and they put us on a different level, I would say, when we're compared to the Western world, even if it is something as simple as women rights. So I think on that note, I just say that I particularly don't agree with the view put forward by you on what the male members of the legal fraternity say. But then again, if that is what we are striving for equality at the end of the day, and if we're saying we have to treat both of them equal, then to a certain extent, or in order to just satisfy them into thinking that, okay, fine, equality hai औरत और मर्द के बीच में, and आप इनको हथकड़ियों में लाएं, आप इनको दूसरी रिमांड करें, जो भी है वगैरह वगैरह. So I think we'll probably have to agree with that, and this is what I say with a heavy heart now. But yeah, I mean, I think I'll just let Aruba take over this one particularly.
Okay, this just reminds me of an instance where I was having this discussion with a male colleague, and I was talking about how there's like a huge wage gap happening. And, end me, like the argument all boiled down to like him saying, Acha, you don't want me to open the door for you. So it's like the battles that we are fighting are so different. But I would even go further, and I would say that like, ye jo apne instances cite pe kiye hain, those are not instances of positive discrimination. Those are instances of just pure discrimination. And the reason why I say that is because even in those particular instances, the courts and the judges are reinforcing stereotypes about women. Okay, custody jo hai wo hamesha aurat ke paas hogi, or guardianship lekin, like the overall providing for the money and all of that thing jo hai wo hamesha father ke paas hoga. So like those kind of stereotypes as well about how a nuclear family structure is supposed to work is problematic, because it doesn't take into account, and it of course, like later on discriminates against single parents and against people who are not in a particular, like unka nuclear family structure nahi hota, right? And it also proceeds to make a lot of assumptions about motherhood in itself. The idea that women are naturally nurturing and more caring, and that has been used to put women out of so many professions, right? हम क्यों कहते हैं कि औरतें जो वो डॉक्टर या प्रोफेसर या टीचर ज़्यादा बेहतर हैं, वो लॉयर शायद इतना नहीं है, because we think कि naturally जो aggressive professions होती हैं उसके अंदर like women can't really take part. And wahi jo stereotypes hain, then they fall into is tarah ki categories jo ki then are seen as positive reinforcement when they really are not. Similarly, jo hathkadi wala aapne example diya, I mean, equitable rules banao na. Like if somebody is not dangerous, then you don't need to put hathkadi on them when you bring them to court. So I've seen like so many instances where like bahut koi bura shakhs hai, usko bhi un logon ne hathkadi mein dala. Like that doesn't make any sense. And we're not asking for these minor rights, and we will not cry if these rights are not given to us, right? Like nobody over here is like, but I want to fight for this right, कि मुझे कोई हाथ खड़ी ना लगाए when I go to court. We're fighting for the bigger war, which is the right to have control over our bodies, to be able to live our lives and have the choice to live our lives in the way we want. So agar aap housewife ke taur pe rehna chahte ho, you should have the choice to do so. Yeah. If you want to have a career, you should have the choice to do so. If you want to balance both, you should have the choice to do so. What profession you choose, what clothes you wear, choice is the important part over here. And in a way which is similar to the choices which are given to men as well. I would suggest that it's not about that औरतों को ज़्यादा choices मिलनी चाहिए, it's मर्दों को भी choice मिलनी चाहिए कि what they want to do in their life. That's what, you know, equality is. So when they talk about positive discrimination, that amounts to like affirmative action. For instance, आप quota system लगा लो जहाँ पर ख़वातीन को जो है वो ज़्यादा seats नहीं मिल रही in order to participate more in political centers or something, right? That makes sense. That's the good kind of discrimination, which is also like embodied in our constitution. But ye jo choti instances hai na, these are only a reflection of social stereotypes, which I mean we can do away with. Lekin in order to do away with them, humne pehle system ko reform karna hai. You can't just like ye bhi na ho na ki like you just throw away these protections, these minor protections, but don't give like the bigger thing. So I guess like that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Ms. Mavra, we'd finally try if you can hear us and if we can hear you. Very unfortunately, I think we still seem to hear you. So that brings us towards the final question. And this is for our audience particularly, and those who are not from legal backgrounds and they want, and female particularly, if they want to pursue the legal career, what would our panelists put forward as the golden brownie points of joining the legal fraternity? Is it a good profession for women? Can women do well? वो जो stereotypes हैं थोड़े कि women could not do well in law, so how would you dispel them for our audience?
Aisha, do you want to take this first?
Okay, sure, I don't mind. I think in terms of the legal profession itself, to be, you know, very transparent, my experience in litigation has not been that vast. After I graduated from bar school, I worked for a short period of time and then I transitioned into legal academics. So I can just talk about that on the basis of the experience that I've had. Now, again, I mean, we talked about choice earlier. You should always have the choice to go into litigation if you want to, despite your gender, whether it's male or female. But if some people, for example, like myself, if I felt like it wasn't my cup of tea, I should also have the choice to go into legal academics or other fields within the legal arena. Now, I think in terms of challenges, yes, there were challenges when I graduated and I entered the profession, and I felt like they did kind of shape my decision to move away from it in terms of litigation alone. But I feel like the legal fraternity and the legal landscape of Pakistan, at least if I talk from a Sindh perspective, has improved significantly. We see perhaps, like 10 years ago, women in court were a rarity. But today we see there are increasing number of women coming to court, increasing number of young lawyers, female lawyers who are coming into court. पहले क्या मसला होता था induction का, कि लड़कियों को कहा जाता था कि आप कानून पढ़े ही नहीं, आप law में जाए नहीं. Today we see that there are more female law graduates than male graduates, which is amazing to see. And then again, when they come into the profession, I wouldn't necessarily call it कि उनके लिए बहुत ज़्यादा challenges होते हैं if you get into a good law firm on the basis of merit, of course. Yes, there are issues of nepotism, but then again, I don't believe that they are, gender-based in any way. So I feel like it is a good profession to come into. If litigation is your passion, go ahead, reclaim your space, whether it's in a law school, whether it's in a courtroom. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. I think Aruba, you'd be better suited for this considering your experience.
Yeah, but like I have so many students who also come up with the exact same question, and it's so hard to give a right answer to this. I don't know, Aisha, if you face this problem as well, but for me particularly, it's very difficult to answer this question because I feel like we could choose like litigation was enter karna, right? And this right, you like stay in it, and then there's also you enter litigation as just like a person, and then you enter litigation as a woman, right? So there are like different perspectives over there as well. So whenever I give advice to students, like I personally talk to them for a very long time because I want to make sure they know what they want to do in their life, just generally in terms of career advice. But like if you're very, very sure about litigation and if that really is the thing for you, then you should go in, but also know, it requires you to hustle, and you are doing a good job because you're integrating in numbers. Like obviously like integration in the legal fraternity will happen through numbers, but also to hustle for positions of power, right? I feel like generally speaking, women, maybe it's because we're socially conditioned, we don't ask for more money, right? And we don't ask for promotions, and we don't go out and hustle as much. And especially one of the problems that women also face is bringing in new clients, which can be a problem in like corporate firms. Whereas men, they have their boy circles, and therefore it's a lot easier to get those client bases. So in terms of that, the only thing I can say that your perspective would truly be nurtured by how you start litigation. So do 1 or 2 years of it, and if that works out for you, then absolutely go for it. But I wouldn't sit here and then tell you, okay, iske ye disadvantages or ye advantages, and because they are very subjective, right? Kuch logon ko like they'll be turned off by the idea that it's very hot and कि बहुत ज़्यादा how do I say this? Like बहुत ज़्यादा बार-बार बारी लगती रहती है, right? And like you can't get your court date. Some people would be put off by the extreme like sexual harassment, which also sometimes goes on in courts. Blatant sexual remarks, that kind of stuff. So your personality would like truly define like how you go about it. But one thing that I will say is that you have to experience it. Whether you make a choice or not, it has to be an informed one on the basis of your own experience. So go into courts, start litigating for a year or 2, and then see how it works out for you, and if that is something that you're interested in. And all the while know this profession is one which is supposed to be very dignified, and it's okay if you're the only person in the court who is that or who embodies that, and that's perfectly fine. It will be lonely, but it's perfectly fine, and just get on with it.
Absolutely. One needs to experience before forming an opinion. Ms. Mavra, one final time, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Miss, fine.
Oh my God. After an hour of trying, we have success. Should I respond to this question, or should I speak to some of the issues we were discussing earlier?
Miss, you have the floor. You can make general remarks about the entire session we had.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So with regard to looking at sort of gender insensitive practices, I agreed with a lot of what Aruba and Aisha were saying, and I just had some additional remarks that I wanted to make. So with regard to the 2-finger test that was banned, it's interesting that a lot of our misogynistic or gender insensitive practices actually stem from English common law. I think that there's this misconception that they stem from our fiqh or from religious laws, but in fact we've inherited a lot of these practices from the English. In terms of the 2-finger test or virginity testing, for example, that's a practice that we actually inherited from the English, specifically the 17th century jurist Sir Matthew Hale, who, and I think this will sound very familiar to a lot of women, he created this sort of Hale's warning that used to be recited in the courts in the UK even till the 80s. And it went like, it is true that rape is a most detestable crime and therefore ought severely and impartially to be punished with death. ये जो हम सुनते हैं कि फांसी दो, this is, I mean, exactly what Hale was saying in, the 1600s. And he goes on to say that it is an accusation easily to be made, hard to be proved, and harder yet to be defended by the party accused, though never so innocent. So once again, he's placing the woman at the center of, rape allegations or cases of sexual violence. And that led to the woman being placed at the center and being sort of scrutinized in these cases. And it's interesting that in this case, with virginity testing, it's a case of medical legal practices following the law. So it was actually the court's demand, because they were scrutinizing the survivor of rape, they wanted sort of definitive proof of whether she was a virgin or not. Because according to them, of course, a non-virgin can't be raped, an elderly woman can't be raped, a married woman can't be raped. So the virginity testing was invented by medical legal officers to satisfy the court. And this is something that, we inherited. And despite the fact that it's now been banned across Pakistan following the Supreme Court decision from earlier this year, what I found when I spoke to a journalist in Karachi is that the practice continues to persist. And this is because the case law, or the judgment of the court, has not trickled down to medical legal officers. So something that Aruba and Aisha were speaking about as well, that this disconnect between the higher courts and the lower courts. We see this disconnect between the courts and parliament, as well as our bureaucracy. When I was working on banning virginity testing, I was advocating for this ban, and I was speaking to the department, the health department in Punjab. One of the other things that we were also working on was getting them to use these sexual assault examination kits. We had about 25,000 of these developed by the Punjab Forensic Science Agency and distributed across hospitals and medical facilities in Punjab. And last year, there was actually a judgment by the Lahore High Court where the head of the DNA and serology department within the Punjab Forensic Science Agency gave testimony and spoke about how when rape victims or rape survivors are examined by medical legal officers, some of the materials used to collect that evidence are incredibly unhygienic. I mean, to the extent where he gave examples of how the tika, or one of the sticks used in our local jharus had been used to collect an internal swab from a rape victim by taking that tinka and just rolling some cotton on the end, which is disgusting. It's appalling. And as a result of this horrendous sort of testimony given by the Punjab Forensic Science Agency, the Lahore High Court issued a set of instructions to the Punjab health departments, and specifically required that these sexual assault examination kits be distributed and be utilized in every single case of rape. And when I spoke to the surgeon medical legal of Punjab, and I told him, you have to use these kits in pursuance of this order from the Lahore High Court, he said, well, it hasn't been officially given to me. My department has not informed me of this, so I don't see that there's anything that I can really do about it. So there's this huge disconnect between the higher courts, the lower courts, then a disconnect between our parliament and our civil, bureaucracy, our civil servants. When we talk about implementation of laws, what we're talking about is our civil servants and our civil servants' responsibility to make sure that our laws are, implemented in spirit and, sort of rapidly, deployed, and that, the relevant officers or, the relevant doctors or police or whoever it is that's responsible, that they're made aware of the law and that they're, given the tools to effectively implement the laws. That's a sort of huge gap that we see when we talk about implementation, is that, we have a plethora of laws. We've had a lot of discussion about the domestic violence law and, what's taking it so long, and, Islamabad, why isn't it being passed, and why is it going to the Council of Islamic Ideology? You look at the rest of the country, we've all passed, all the different provinces have passed a version of the domestic violence bill that we see in Islamabad. Yet the conviction rate that we have for domestic violence stands at 0% across the country. And the problem is that domestic violence isn't really distinguished as something that's very serious. It's viewed, when we talk about, unfortunately, when we talk about gender-based violence, we sort of put all of these different types of violence into the same box. And when you put all of these different types of violences into the same box, the most egregious ones are the ones that stand out, right? So the murder of a woman or the rape of a woman is something that the police and our criminal justice system will focus on more than domestic violence, even though in terms of numbers, you have a lot more cases of domestic violence. And this view that, domestic violence is a ghar ka mamla is something that I really want to challenge, because when we talk about, the suit for restoration or restitution of conjugal rights, wo ghar ka mamla nahi hai. Often what we see in terms of in divorce cases is that the man will respond to a woman's suit for divorce with his own suit for restitution of conjugal rights, which is essentially, a man asking the court to make his wife, who he's separated from, who's seeking a divorce, make her come back to his home and perform her duties as a wife. And often the focus seems to be on, sexual intercourse in these cases. So when you sort of reduce it down to, what it is materially, you're asking the court to allow you or give you legal cover to rape your wife. She's not consenting to this, but you're asking the court to basically send her back to the house so that she can do all of the unpaid labor, washing dishes, clothes, cleaning the house, all of that, and performing sexual duties. And, the Legal Aid Society looked at, the number of cases where a suit for restitution of conjugal rights was made, and the vast majority of these suits were filed by men. Even though women and men can both file this suit, you see this sort of disparity. It's always a case of a woman trying to escape a bad marriage and a man trying to enforce his will upon her. And it sort of, this idea again of restitution of conjugal rights stems from feudal English common law. It's not part of our religious laws. This doesn't come from fiqh. The UK has repealed, the law that provided for this, yet we carry it on and cause women in unhappy marriages a great deal of agony and make them spend a lot of money going through the courts. I even came across a court case from Peshawar where a woman had not complied with the order of the court in relation to restitution of conjugal rights. And the husband, or the ex-husband or the separated spouse, he, in retaliation, asked the court to attach her property. This is kind of the extent of the violence that we see perpetrated against women. We often hear this again and again in our society that, Islam gives women so many protections. For example, one of the things that frequently is quoted is that a woman's money is her own money and the husband's money is also her money. The idea behind this is that women are taken care of by their father, brother, husband, chacha, just any man. And it is the man's responsibility, his sole responsibility, to earn the money. And I ask you, how is it that a woman's money is her own when at every bank in Pakistan, women are being barred from opening bank accounts? Proof of income, for example, is required whenever you go to open a bank account. And every rubber stamping bank clerk in Pakistan, in urban and rural settings, will tell a woman, sorry, we can't open a bank account unless you have, a letter from your employer, or sorry, we can't open a bank account unless you're a tax filer. I want to be clear here that it doesn't matter if you have a job or you're widowed or elderly, you have to file your tax returns in Pakistan without fail every year. that's an additional burden that's placed on housewives. If you have some sort of property that you want to keep in a bank, you have to be a tax filer, you have to have some sort of proof of income. And these are gender insensitive barriers, that women face. And they basically prevent women from being able to control their own property. So when we say that, a woman's money is her own money or her own property, that's completely untrue, because unfortunately our banks and our legal systems don't protect women's rights to their inheritance, to their property. And I promise you that every woman in your acquaintance has a horror story about her in-laws using or withholding her property, or using her money to buy property in the husband's name. This happened to a cousin of mine. This happened to a client of mine. Where are the laws that protect women's property in Pakistan? According to the State Bank of Pakistan, 7% of bank accounts are women's bank accounts. When you compare it to other Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia, it's 58%. In Iran, it's 92% of women having their own separate bank accounts. And if you don't have a bank account, you can't apply for loans. I've seen a lot of effort recently by the state bank, to offer loans to female entrepreneurs. How do you do that when you're not even able to open your own separate bank account? So what I want to tell all of the listeners is, sort of parting advice is, challenge myths, always challenge myths. Anything that you hear about women or men, any stereotypes, look at the data. Does it bear up? We need to center men in these conversations as well. It's not just violence against women. It is men's violence against women. It is men that are the problem, and we need to talk about that. It's not, we see this when our journalists report on rape. They say, XYZ woman was raped, or a woman in Greentown was raped. We need to talk about how it was a men that perpetrated that violence. And we need to advocate for implementation of our laws. We need to talk about how we need to talk to our civil servants. We need to write to our parliamentarians. We need to ask them why certain laws aren't being implemented. There was supposed to be an authority under the Protection of Women Act in Punjab that has not been established. There were supposed to be GBV courts that were supposed to be established. 1,000 plus of these in Punjab. We still only have one in Lahore. There's a lot of work to do, and I encourage everyone listening to participate in sort of making Pakistan a better country. This question as well of women have separate lines. There's these protections for women, these superficial ones, separate lines for women. A woman, if a woman doesn't want to be punched, then she should punch back. I want to advocate for a society where we don't have violence. Nobody punch anyone. If we want to take away, the positive discrimination or the sort of things in our legal framework or in our society that protect women, then we need real gender parity. Unless I see 100% of parliamentarians are women and all the judges are women and nobody raises an eyebrow, this isn't even a point of discussion, that's when we'll truly know that gender doesn't matter anymore in our society. So until we come to that sort of point, we need protections, we need positive discrimination, and we need real implementation of laws.
Thank you, Ms. Mavra. And what it mean for me, it was an eye. And I would reiterate, we need to challenge society to change as a whole. That brings us to the end of this session, but to the end of the 6th YGA Legal Conference 2021. I must extend my most sincere gratitude and appreciation to the entire panel for their time and commitment. Although we couldn't actually get to hear a lot from Ms. Mavra, but the fact that she did speak at the end, it was an eye-opener and extremely insightful. Barrister Aisha Iqbal, Ms. Aruba Sattar, and Ms. Khatija also, we're very grateful to you. And thank you, Ms. Mavra, for your persistence. This is an actual end point that I had. Thank you for connecting again and again, despite there was some issue with the StreamYard. I'm actually very, very glad that we did get to hear from you. It was an extremely insightful session for me, and I'm sure for our entire audience who tuned in and who will be tuning in once we post a recording. I also extend my gratitude to Ms. Nida and Women in Law, without whom this session wouldn't have been possible. Once again, I'm very grateful. It was an absolute pleasure to hear from all of you.
Thank you for having us. It was great to hear from the other panelists as well. While I tried to connect.
I'm really glad we managed to connect at the end, by the way.
It was great meeting you, ladies. Once again, great work, and I actually look forward to. I think Mavra, you're publishing something, hopefully soon. So looking forward to it.
Edited by Aruba.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the first one is going very well.
Okay.
You'll just have to
okay,
get a small red cross, and you just have to press that.
Okay. I'm very politely telling us to go.
Yeah, and he's like, we can do this later, you know, like maybe take it to somewhere else. Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.